Hello, so sorry about the lack of updates lately. I have been really busy at work. It's just been a change of jobs last year, which has just meant less and less time for other things. However, it is a job that I quite enjoy, so this is not in any way a complaint. But what I thought I'd do is something I haven't done on the channel before, but perhaps you guys are into the same sort of nerdy pursuits that I am, things like films and TV, otherwise you wouldn't be here probably. So I thought I would go through my Magic the Gathering decks. So I have loaded them all up onto Top Decked, and that's what you can see now on the screen. Don't be too alarmed by the prices. You can see the prices on the right hand side here. The most significantly expensive card you'll see is Cavern of Souls, and if your budget doesn't stretch that far, and mine doesn't either frankly, you can just swap that out for some other kind of multicolored mana. The simplest deck that I have to play is this one that's called BNA, so let's open that up. What that stands for is Black No Attack. So this really suits somebody that wants to just sort of turtle or sit back and defend and build this stuff up. And you can quite clearly see straight away what this deck is built around. So we've got some nice early game blockers here. Two mana, 2/3, that would alone be worth the value, but it's Death Touch and Lifelink as well, so that's an absolute bargain. This one is a 3 mana flying Death Touch and Lifelink, so basically these are the ones that are going to make your opponents think twice about attacking you. Then you have things like Veto, who is an absolute removal magnet because of his ability, which is whenever you gain life, target opponent loses that much life. You can also give your creatures lifelink, but that's irrelevant because they already have it. And then, something like a Cavern would suit those three because your vampire creatures wouldn't be counterable. But this one's not. It's a Snake Glimmer, and what it is, it's a 4 mana version of Veto. It kicks a lot harder. It's a 4/3, but you're not really going to be attacking with it. You might have to block occasionally, but what happens if that one dies is it stays on the battlefield as an enchantment, so you still get, whenever you gain life, target opponent loses that much life. So every time you block, you gain a little bit of life. You might lose your creature, but that's fine because we have graveyard returns in the deck as well. So really what you're doing is you want to just make them think twice about attacking, and when they do, you want to be blocking and gaining with the lifelink, which Veto and then Enduring Tenacity will return that hit to them. We have some instants to help ourselves, and these ones are going to be early game. Before you get Veto out, you might want to remove like some smaller creatures. They'll do that because they're low cost, but later on they're rampable. Erebus's Intervention. Target creature gets -X/-X until the end of turn, and you gain X. So you could be playing that turn 3, 2 mana removal, give you something a -2/-2 that's going to get rid of most things in that early part of the game. But later on, when you get 7 or 8 swamps down, it's going to hit like a truck. You're going to gain that 7 life. You're going to be removing their creature and hitting them for that 7 or 8 with the same card. So this one is a 2 mana card, but it deals X damage to a creature or planeswalker, and I gain the X life, and that's based on how many swamps I control, and realistically I'm only going to have swamps. And this one is only 1, but if an opponent gains life in that turn, then I can pay 1 mana rather than the 7, and I gain 5 life and they take 5 damage, which means of course they take 10, because if I've got either that or that out, then it's going to hit them really hard. If I've got 2 of these out, you can be looking at like a game over situation. So there's some sorceries as well. They all do the same thing. It's Battle at the Bridge on this side. Again, it's just a -X/-X, and I'm gaining the X life. It's just removal and healing. This one is return creature from the graveyard. We're very unlikely to have the green mana to kick that, which is a shame, but it's the 2 health as well as getting my creature back, so I'm hitting them for 2, perhaps 4 if I've got Veto and Enduring out, and I'm getting my creature back for 1 mana. However, I do have over this side in the artifacts, you see I've got a File of Galadriel, so that will add mana of any colour, so it's possible that you could kick it and get 2 creatures back. And there's a version of this kind of -X/-X that heals you for X that does damage to your opposition. That might be a better option than the Flay Essence. You've already got plenty of creature removal. Artifacts, Soul Ring, why not? a little bit of mana boost. You could probably swap that out for 2 more of these. With this deck, you can just kind of sit back, hide behind your Death Touch, and then this stuff, you're just removing their creatures with the instants and sorceries, gaining life in the process. So your life is going up, theirs is going down, and it really hits hard. It's a good deck. So from that deck, we'll move on to what is on here is the Dino Discard. This deck I've had really mixed results with, and you may want to consider looking at this deck and perhaps reworking it, or having stuff that's more targeted, like mill into your own graveyard and then find that one card that you want out of your graveyard, or search your deck for the one card that you want. So what's not in this deck, because I built this before the card was available, is Cynical Loner, which lets you search your library for a card and put it into your graveyard. And the reason that you're doing that is because we're using Bleeding Effect. Now what Bleeding Effect does is it gives you a whole bunch of abilities on your turn if those abilities are present in your graveyard, which is why you can see sort of stuff that I've had in this deck that is not in it at the moment, something like the Zaphid Slyblade, because that's got hexproof. So if that's in my graveyard, all my creatures have hexproof, but only on my combat and second main phase, not my first or the opposition's turn, which is why this deck is not where I'd like it to be. So basically the premise is you're going to use the Era Falconwrath to discard a card. And the card that you're going to discard is this one. This is a Talpa Primal Dawn, because when it goes in your graveyard, on your combat and your second main, all of your creatures will have flying, double strike, vigilance, trample, and indestructible. If the game goes on long enough, occasionally you can just play it and have it out as a creature. It's a good creature, but really you want that in the graveyard, so all of your stuff has that. But it is only on your turn. So on our turn, we still have some of the same cards we had before. We have the Nighthawk, we have the Vampire of the Dire Moon, Death Touch, Lifelink. It's a good blocker. This guy, he's pretty cool. When you attack, and he doesn't have to attack, but as long as you attack with something, you put a token on that thing, and when it dies, it comes back as a 4/3. So I can sacrifice my Vampire of the Dire Moon, Death Touch, Lifelink. I attack with that, or block with that. If it's got that token on it, it'll go into my graveyard, and the 4/3 demon that I create will automatically, if I have Bleeding Effect present, have Death Touch and Lifelink on my turn. And if I have the Zatalpa in the graveyard, it gets all that other stuff as well. So it can hit really, really hard. But what I just found was, like, the Condemned is a bad card. It's not a good card. It's just there because I need to be able to discard. Things like March of the Canonizers is a much better card than that one, because again, I'm getting tokens from it. And the tokens will get the benefit of all of this stuff as well. So yeah, there's some removal. There's a Soul Ring for a mana ramp. You could probably just take that out. The land is mixed, so I've got Cavern of Souls. You can see that when I was thinking of having hexproof in my graveyard, that this is to combat those blue decks that forever. It wasn't as effective as it might be, but that's why Caverns there. Swap that out, have some more of these, just put plains and swamps in if you prefer. So that's why this deck looks expensive. All these cards are surprisingly cheap. This one's quite expensive, but it's a mana token and a creature boost. You know, this guy, when you flip him, he gives all of your vampires at +2/+2. So things like March the Canonized, Call the Bloodline, they're at least creating tokens that hit quite hard. There's a number of ways of winning the game, but what I found was that it was very much a mixed bag. It really needs a little bit of tidying up, and someone that's better at sort of working with a graveyard than I could probably make this deck work really nicely. This is a fun deck. I've only played this a handful of times, and it's one of those things, you know, you see a card and you go, I wonder how you make that work. So I've got Selfless Savior and I've got Skrelv. Probably ought to only have 3 because that's a legendary, but the deck is built around Eriette the Beguiler. What she does is, when I have an aura, I play it on an opponent's creature and I gain control of that creature as long as the aura is the same mana value as the creature. So we'll have a look at the auras in a bit and see what they do. You might want to swap out the Selfless Savior for the Selfless Samurai or something like that. It'll give you a little bit more of a kick in the early game. But one of the fun things about this is if you get Skrelv out on turn 1, people are like, crap, it's a poison deck. And they start to really worry, and it's not a poison deck at all. I mean, you can win by poison, but it is not a poison deck. The reason I've got Skrelv there is because of the ability where it's like choose a color and you can make area hexproof from that color by paying 2 life with Skrelv. The same reason I've got Selfless Savior. Everything is in this deck is basically based around keeping area alive. But to be clear, you've got 4. So you might just draw another one and not need to work so hard at that. So perhaps some of these could be scaled down to something that hits a bit harder. But you're not going to be attacking with those. Though, like I said, they're to keep area alive. Skrelv, keep area alive. What you're going to be doing is get area out turn 4, which is hard because she's a 3 mana, 3 different colours. And then you've got all of these. So you've got things like Raffine's Guidance, and probably could do less of those because you don't really want to be stealing 1 mana creatures, but sure, you may as well take them if they're there. 2 mana creature you can steal with that one, and that one. 3 mana creature with this one, 3 mana creature with this one, 4 with this one, and 5 with this one. But by the point you're playing that you're going to be winning the game. So what do these auras do? Well, when I steal a creature, I want 2 things out of my aura. 1, to be able to replay that aura if I need it. And 2, to steal that creature and make it hit for me harder than it would have hit for them. So I've got things like just +1/+1, but I can pay it from my graveyard for 3 mana. No problem. This one, lifelink, but +1/+1 when a creature dies. So I'm like buffing the creature as well as stealing it. This one, +1/+1 and flying. Sometimes you're casting this on your own creature. If you can't get area out quick enough, you're putting this on Skrelv, so you're flying over the top to apply the poison damage. And again, can play it from a graveyard. Gift of Immortality, I enchant the creature, and when a creature dies, it comes back to the battlefield under my control. So I'm stealing their creature, that creature's then dying, and it's coming back under my control anyway. And on top of that, return a Gift of Immortality to the battlefield attached to that creature at the beginning of your next end step. Of the next end step. So the creature dies on an opponent's turn. On their end step, I get back my creature and I get back my enchantment. So I steal their creature and I'm just hitting them with it every turn. Really nice. Screams Within is nice because it gives a -1/-1, which you don't really want if you're stealing a creature, but when it's put into a graveyard, it goes straight back onto the battlefield. So what happens is you put a -1 on one creature with 1 toughness, dies straight back onto the battlefield onto another one, or you can add it to like a 4/4 and that becomes a 3/3 for you. Angelic Destiny is a lovely one because it's a 4/4. I'm stealing their creature and I'm buffing it by 4/4 to attack them with it. And it becomes flying and first strike, and it's an angel in the process. And when it dies, I return the aura to my hand. So I can play it again and again and again. Fool's Demise, same sort of thing. It's a nice one where you go, when a creature dies, return that to the battlefield under your control. So I steal their creature, it dies, and I get their creature back, and I don't even need to enchant it the second time round, which is fine. But when I do, Fool's Demise goes from the graveyard back into my hand. These enchantments are evil. This is the deck for pure saltiness. When it comes off, which isn't every time, it comes off beautifully, and it's so annoying. But actually you can just win the game with like Skrelv and other things and not really enchanting that many creatures, because you can put poison, you can make the flying, you can make it a 5/5 and just be hitting for 5/5 and only add in poison, but you'll kill it as your opponent with hitting them with a 5/5 quicker than by adding 1 poison. So the nightmare for this is obviously you've got a 3 mana creature that you want to be playing on turn 4 or 5, because if you go any longer than that, chances are you're going to be losing these 2, having to block, and you don't really want to do that. You really want to be taking their creatures and then blocking with them. So it's a slow deck, and if your mana doesn't pay off, you're going to struggle. Patchwork Banner, add 1 mana of any colour, that's handy. We've got the Arcane Sanctum, which comes in tapped and is 3 colours. I've got 1 island because I'm going to be fishing in my deck using other cards to find them. I've got the Isolated Chapel because it's handy, it comes in untapped. So I've got a couple of those. Then I've got these, which are basically Evolving Wilds, but they're slightly better because although I can only search for Plains, Island or Swamp, that's the only 3 colours that I have. And when I find one, I gain 1 life, which is just 1 step up from Evolving Wild, which doesn't give you the 1 life. plains, swamps, and a restless anchorage, which is blue and black. So there's some other enchantments. There's one with a horse, and I can't remember what it's called. It's got a horse on the cover and on the art, and that's another one that goes in and out of the graveyard. But it is about 4 mana, so that's why it's not in here. But perhaps it's something you could put in there. Enchantment goes in the graveyard, and you just get it back. That's the theme of the enchantments, is that when I enchant something, I can be reckless with it. I'm going to attack you with it, because 2 of my enchantments literally give me that creature back as soon as it dies, and the other one is it will be playable from the graveyard anyway. So yeah, I can be really reckless. I can attack when you think perhaps you shouldn't, but it doesn't matter. Not your creatures that are dying at the end of the day. So there's another deck. It's looking expensive, but it's looking expensive because there's Caverns of Souls. Nothing else in here is that expensive. This deck is built around this card. It's another one of those, well, how do you make this card work for you? So you can discard a card, and when you do, this thing flips and it becomes a mist that's hexproof and indestructible. It's a 0/1. It can't block or be blocked. If somebody targets this with a spell, discard a card, 1 mana. It can't be removed. The only thing that could be removed would be like a Meat Hook Massacre or something that did a -/ across the board. But what you can do, which is the nice trick, is you have it in its mist form, you attack with it. They can't block it. But as soon as you go to the combat phase, you pay 3 mana. 1 is black, I think 2 colourless. And you turn it back into a 4/4. Hit for the 4. And it, like I say, is post-declare blockers. So it just is uncounterable in that way. It's a little bit expensive for what it is. But what we also have is some nice stuff to make the discard work for us. So we're looking at Madness, which means when you discard a card, you can play it straight away if it has Madness. So it's like a cheap version of Flash, or an expensive version of Flash in some instances. But we've got the Falkenrath Gorger. What he does is any creature cards not on the battlefield have Madness. So this thing doesn't have Madness, but if I discard it, I can pay the 2 mana and play it straight away on the opponent's turn or mine. Same with Markov Baron, but he gives all my vampires +1/+1. This thing's going to hit for 5 if I've got one of those. If I get 2 of them, it's hitting for 6, 7, perhaps 8. I can play this guy, which is a 5 mana creature and good value for 5 for 2. The Falkenrath Gorger is another one that perhaps you just don't need. Perhaps like to have 1 less of those and 1 more of these. But you can get rid of. There's only 3 there. I started with 4, and you can see that it just doesn't come up that often that you want to be playing these from discard. And that's because of all the other stuff that we have that we can play from discard. I mean, I'm going to play this ahead of that. So there's a ton of removal in this deck. Oh, I forgot Olivia Mobilized for War. Just a way, again, when I play it, when I have Olivia out, I can play another creature, and I can put a +1/+1 on that if I discard a card, which again I can play at any point. So yeah, I could be playing, for example, on their turn, I'm flashing in something for this, using this to discard a card rather, playing in a creature. I can then discard another one and then play another one, or do something else to play another card for cheap, using Madness. Buff my own creatures, play 2 or 3 creatures out on their turn. I've got Bedevil for a bit of removal. I've got Feed the Serpent. So there's all of this is removal. And then I've got Call to the Netherworld, which I can return a black creature card from my graveyard to my hand. And if I discard this card to flip that, or to use Olivia, I can play it for 0. So I can play it for free, get something back out of my graveyard for nothing. The Patchwork Banners are there really for buffing the Elusive Tormentor. Like if I've got 2 Markov Barons, 2 Patchwork Banners, my 4/4 is an 8/8. So this one is built around artifacts. So there we go. I've got Soul Rings and Patchwork Banners, but I've got Darksteel Plate, Sparring Collars, Hidden Blades, Bladed Pinions. Blade of the Bloodchief's a bit different, but it's when a creature dies, put a +1/+1 on anything with this equipped, unless it's a vampire, in which case it gets 2 +1/+1s, and all of our creatures are vampires. The other thing that you'll notice is that they're very familiar, some of these cards, I'm sure, because they're Death Touch, Lifelink, Death Touch, Lifelink, Death Touch. And the thing about the Death Touch is The only way Death Touch could be better is if you have First Strike, right? Well, Bladed Pinions give you First Strike, Hidden Blade, First Strike, Sparring Collar, First Strike, Darksteel Plate, Indestructible. So what you can be doing, and it works really quite nicely, particularly because you've got Soul Rings, you've got a lot of colourless mana to work with these things, is you can be putting a Darksteel Plate on, say, one of these, attack with it in your second main, swap it onto whatever you've left back as a blocker for next turn, and your attacker and your blocker will be indestructible. So these things are there for your end game. You know, when the game's starting to go on a little bit longer, the +2/+2 whenever a creature dies, that's going to start to really build up and hit hard. And when this guy is like, whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, put that many +1/+1 counters on it. So this is a 1/1. Next turn it's a 2/2, then it's a 4/4, 8/8, etc. Adding on this thing onto the same creature, you're going to be racking up even more counters than that. It's going to hit really hard the longer the game goes on. So that's why that's there, but there's only one, so you don't always see it. Some instants for removal. I think that's a graveyard. Get stuff back from your graveyard. Little bit of removal, probably not as much as you might like. But the reason you don't need removal, you certainly don't need to be removing creatures, is because you're going to have Death Touch on everything. And then quite likely you're going to have Death Touch and First Strike on quite a lot of things. So doesn't matter. The other creatures are 12/12. Doesn't matter. Your 1/1 will kill it and not take a scratch. So it's really nice, this deck, for a little bit of saltiness, and it's mono black, so you're never going to have problems with mana. You could probably even look at maybe taking a couple of them down. Really nice deck, hits really hard. And one of the reasons I created that deck was because I created this white counters deck and let other people play it. And you can see that it's like $43 on the right hand side of the screen. So it's a really cheap deck. But it also hits really hard. And it goes pretty wide. You can have like a good amount of creatures out. And you're buffing all of them all the time. So the white one, it's a bargain, $43. If you want to get into Magic, start here. It's a really nice deck. Champion of the Parish. Whenever another human enters the battlefield under your control, put a +1 counter on Champion of the Parish. All of our creatures, all of these and all of these, they're all human. So anytime you're playing another creature, +1/+1. And they're all cheap. Like the 3 mana is, that one's a 4 mana. So they're all cheap. You're going to be playing loads and loads of creatures out. This thing's going to get pretty big. When this enters the battlefield, if it was the second spell you cast this turn, put a +1/+1 on target creature. So this is the theme, is that +1/+1's on everything all the time. This guy, you can play one extra 2 mana when you play him, and he gets a Valor counter. So not a +1/+1, but a Valor counter. And what that does, it gives a +1/+1 to all of your creatures. Luminarch Aspirant. At the beginning of combat on your turn, put a +1/+1 counter. So you don't have to attack. You just go to your combat phase. You're putting a +1/+1 counter somewhere. This one, you can pay 1 white mana and tap the card. Puts a +1 counter on any creature. And any creature with a +1 counter on it has flying. So straight away, you've got flying on all of your creatures. Siege Veteran. So the beginning of combat, again, don't have to go actually attack. Don't have to do anything. Just go into your combat phase. +1 from that one, +1 from this one on something, +1 from this one on something. And whenever a creature dies, you create a token. This one, again, you can just pay 1 mana, put a +1 counter on anything, and any creature that you have with a +1 counter on it has lifelink. So everything that you have will have a counter on it. Everything that you have will have flying and lifelink. And you'll be playing 2-3 creatures a turn. After turn sort of 3 or 4, these things will get huge. You've got instants as well. So you've got this one you can play as a land, or you can play it as removal. It does 1 damage for each of your creatures. You're going to have 5 or 6 most times. Light of Hope. I can gain 5 life. I can destroy an enchantment, or I can put a +1/+1 counter on something. Requisition Raid. I can remove an artifact. I can remove an enchantment, and if I pay enough mana, I get a +1/+1 counter. I've got a Heraldic Banner. Probably a Patchwork Banner would be better. And I've got Dusk and Dawn, which destroy all creatures of power 3 or greater, and then I can play that to return all the creatures that have power 2 or less, which is most of our creatures. So I can basically board wipe and then the turn after start getting like a lot of my own creatures back and start building up all over again. Gleam of Authority is an evil card in this deck. You might want to consider 4 of them, because you enchant your creature and it gets a +1/+1 counter for each +1/+1 counter on a target that I control. And you're going to be looking at turn 3 or 4, you're going to have 7 or 8 of those. It's a 2 mana card to give yourself a 7 or 8. This one as well, I skipped over it, I'm going to come back to it. It's a 1 mana creature, but you put a +1/+1 on it for 1 mana. So you pay 5/6 mana, it's a 5/5. You pay 5 mana, sorry, it's a 4/4. But then you can tap it in your next turn to give all of your creatures, all of them, a +1/+1. And you can just tap it, put a 1 counter on you. I mean, what you really want to consider is a card that untaps. There's a Planeswalker I think you can use to untap. So you might want to consider throwing that in this deck, because then you can be doing this multiple times in a turn, but you won't need to because your creatures will already be getting significant buffs. Mono white, so 18 land is plenty. You've got the Kabira takedown if you need it. Play the other side, white mana, no problem. This is mana as well. You're not going to have a mana problem with this deck even with just 18. So it's really cheap and it hits really hard and builds really quick. It's a great deck. So there you go. There's a deck there to suit whatever playing style you might want on that day. And they're all, as far as I know, there might be, you know, when I built them, they were all modern friendly, but if there's been a card banned, unfortunately, it's one that I didn't see. I don't keep a religious eye on those things, so something might have been banned in the meantime, which would be a shame. But otherwise, there's a good set of decks there for you to choose from. And I don't actually profess to being like a Magic expert. So if you find that, you know, you play something similar or you play this card and it synergizes well, perhaps particularly with the Bleeding Effect deck, which is that one, perhaps you've got a way of making that work for you a little bit better. I'm always up to hear about it. So feel free to leave me a comment and see you in the next video. Bye.
Sexington University is just your everyday, typical university. Nothing out of the ordinary ever happens here. There's no alien attacks, no homicidal houseplants, no meteor showers, no Cthulhu cults, no fatal field trips, and absolutely no alien professors. Enroll today and get this fabulous free pen.